Hey, it's Paul. Before we get started, we need to make sure that you, the listener, knows that we are not mental health professionals and not qualified to prescribe therapies or therapeutic advice. We are also not your gurus and have no aspirations in that direction. We are simply two people who are trying to feel better and do better in our lives, just like you. And now, on with the show.
Yo, dog.
What's up, Flapjack?
Not much. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Hey, listen, I'm calling a pre-production meeting for the podcast. I want to know what subject you want to talk about this week.
You know what I've been thinking a lot about lately?
What's that?
Cynicism.
Cynicism. Oh, well, what's the point of doing a podcast about that? The world's terrible.
Amen, dude. But I think we should do it anyway.
All right. We'll do it. We'll do it for the kids. We'll do it anyway.
Talk soon, man.
Talk soon.
Bye.
Freedom over fame. Freedom over cycle stays the same.
Welcome to the show. I'm Paul Overton.
And I'm Nora McMahon.
And today on If We Only Knew Then, the podcast of hard-earned wisdom, we are talking about cynicism.
Cynicism, it's that thing that we think protects our heart, but it actually holds us in constant disappointment.
We're going to take apart cynicism from several different angles. We're going to define what it is first and separate it from nihilism and skepticism, two things that are often conflated with it, but are totally different. And then we're going to give you some techniques that we've used, being recovering cynics, to get to the other side of cynicism so that we could live a more joyful, engaged, and service-oriented life. And hopefully at the end of the podcast, you might see a crack of light in that direction as well. So, let's dig in.
Freedom.
All right, Nora, so we're talking about cynicism on the podcast today. This is a subject that you wanted to talk about, and I just immediately jumped on board with. But I want to know, what brings you to want to talk about cynicism today?
I've been having a lot of conversations with different friends of mine who, most of them are in that middle-aged era of our lives. And there's that notion of like the middle-aged squeeze where there are just so many factors of our life that we have to handle.
Aging parents, our bodies are starting to do different things than they used to. We're starting to have friends die. There's a lot of things
shit's
happening.
coming up.
Yeah,
man, shit's like they're
children. Like, our children are leaving the house.
Yeah, there's all sorts of struggles, right? And that like I don't know that anyone ever really prepared us for, but here we are. And I think for so many of them, there's just this innate cynicism of how they're looking at life and engaging with their life, because it just feels like it's never going to change. And I think there is definitely the hope that there's that little bit of hope that maybe things will change, but it's actually weighing them down. Is this armor of how life is right now is weighing them down from seeing a way out.
I 100% agree. It's that whole thing of seemingly protecting yourself from disappointment, but keeping yourself there, which we'll talk about later. But that armor can be so heavy, like you said, you can't then move, and it doesn't actually protect you at that point if you can't move around in it. You know,
I agree, and I think a lot of people aren't even aware of their cynicism, that it's so baked in that they're not even aware of how cynical their outlooks are.
And the reason that I wanted to do this so bad, because I feel like both of you and I have worked our way through a lot of that stuff in recent years and have a whole new outlook really on the way to move through the world and be okay with what is and the people that are. And a lot of that has been through, dissolving our cynicism over time.
Yeah. And I think the conversations I have with friends of mine when I'm trying to like help them see that side of themselves and that there are other ways of being and viewing the world. I think for a lot of them, it's like they're hesitant to believe me, but they know what I've been through in my life. And so they're like, wait a minute, maybe she has something to say here, because they know, like I've had a cancer diagnosis. They know I've held my dad's hand while he died in front of me. They like, there are some real shit that have happened in my middle age that I've been navigating. And it's been real difficult, but it's also shedding that cynicism has been a survival mechanism for me.
Yeah, 100%. All right, before we get into our main topic of cynicism here, I think we need to separate three terms that are often conflated with each other but are not the same thing. Those three terms are nihilism, skepticism, and our topic of the day, cynicism. So let's start with nihilism. What is nihilism? Nihilism is the rejection of all religious and moral principles, basically. It's in the belief that life is meaningless, ultimately. There's no inherent or meaning or purpose to anything that we do or anything that exists here. There's no real knowledge. Humans are animals. We can't really know anything. It's a pretty bleak way to look at the world and not something I subscribe to, but there you go. That's nihilism. All right, cynicism is a bit different. Cynicism is an inclination to believe that people are motivated purely by self-interest, basically, that there's no such thing as being motivated by a pure heart or pure charity or pure care or pure love, that there's always some kind of angle that people have that they're working in anything that they might do in the world. That is a cynical viewpoint. It's the most pervasive. We have a lot of evidence for it in our world, and that's why we're talking about it today. And before we move on to skepticism, I'll say one more thing about cynicism, which is that pessimism is closely related. In fact, it's the same thing, basically. It's just pessimism. It's just cynicism about the future, right? So pessimism is cynicism about the future. Regarding chances of success you might have or assessments of risk you might do. So in other words, for example, an unsupportive parent who really underestimates the chances that their kid's career is going to work out well, that's a pessimistic attitude. So that's cynicism about the future, all right? Lastly, we've got skepticism, which is just a questioning attitude or doubt toward knowledge that claims to be a mere belief or dogma in the world. So it's what we should all have. It's just a questioning attitude toward everything. You don't take anything on face value until further exploration, and that is skepticism. So there are our definitions, and now we can move forward.
Mm-hmm. I just have to say I love your inner philosophy nerd.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoy it. I don't know nearly much about it as a philosophy major, but I enjoy reading about it. So there you go.
I love that. And I just want to say too that to me, the kind of watered down version of the difference between nihilism and a nihilist and a cynic is that a nihilist has no hope.
Yeah.
There's no hope there. Whereas a cynic will try to protect the kind of little still burning embers of hope in them, but trying to protect that by racing disappointment to the finish line. You know, there's almost a self-righteousness of being able to say like, haha, I told you it wouldn't work out. But the difference is nihilism, you just don't have that hope. Cynicism, there's a little ember of a spark of hope that's being protected, quote unquote.
I agree. There's a quote by Jeff Bridges that I really like that speaks to that exact thing, which is most cynics are really crushed romantics. They've been hurt, they're sensitive, and their cynicism is a shell that's protecting this tiny, dear part of them that's still alive. And I love that quote because that's really what it is. And the cynics are at their heart, they're optimists, that have been crushed too many times. And that's so easy to have happen to you in this society that we live in now, isn't it? I mean, it's so easy just to armor up and protect yourself from everything that could possibly hurt you. And that's what cynicism does, Yeah,
and I think that's the fallacy is that it protects you because it actually doesn't.
No.
But that's what changed for me is when I recognized that my innate cynicism was not actually protecting me from disappointment. It was just keeping me disappointed all the time.
Yeah.
And then with maybe a little hope that it wouldn't be the way that I thought it would be.
Let that sink in. Can you just say that one more time for the listeners? Because I really liked what you said there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's when I realized that cynicism doesn't actually protect my heart. It keeps me in a state of disappointment all the time. And that's why in the intro I was saying, when I recognize that could lead to depression, it just wires us for depression. So yeah, when I recognize that it doesn't protect us. A lot of cynics think that they're protecting their heart when they're actually just living in a constant state of disappointment. Yeah.
Brene Brown has a great little thing that she lives by all the time, which is strong back, soft front, wild heart, which I like those three things together. And that's sort of an anti-cynical attitude. You are strong and you're protected against the world and you can carry what the world gives you. However, your front is soft, your heart is open, you're willing to change your mind, you're willing to accept people and as they are and things as they are in the world. And then your heart is the is what you follow. It's the wild compass that leads you around in there. I really like that idea. That's an anti-cynical
I also love
idea.
Brené Brown.
Yeah, she's great.
So wise.
She's great. Yeah, she does good stuff. Okay, so when did that come to you, Nora? When did you figure out that cynicism was a thing in your life? Were you blind to it and then all of a sudden it came to you, or was it a long process of sort of realizing that that's where you were?
No, I was definitely not blind to it. First off, for anyone who does not know me, I'm kind of not a walking cliche, but I'll paint the picture of I am East Coast Irish Catholic, which is, if you know anything about East Coast Irish Catholics that come from like working class neighborhoods or, places like that, it is our default mode. And when I really stopped to think about it, I think the roots of it for me are, it's intergenerational trauma. If you know anything about Irish history in Ireland, it is a history rife with survivorhood and trauma, which gets passed on, and that there's a survivalist mindset. And I think cynicism can get passed down. It can get passed down even in the humor. Like, I find sarcastic, cynical humor hilarious because it hits a chord with me. That being said, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I think that really was the big wake-up call for me, because I really had to take a good hard look at how I was living my life. My cancer diagnosis had me see acutely my own mortality. Like, we all know that we're going to die, but when you're faced with something like your mortality in a very real way like that, it is an opportunity for you to look at your life and how you want to live it and how you want to change yourself. And so with that, I kind of took a hard look at how I was living my life and my mindset. And the very limited time that we have in this form, I wanted to maximize joy and beauty and connection. And that became a lot more intentional. And cynicism doesn't really serve that. I recognize that. It doesn't serve that part of me. So really the catalyst for me was my cancer diagnosis, I think.
It's interesting. I just want to touch on what you said about your intergenerational trauma, though, too. And it's not just intergenerational where you can get it either. It's cynicism is known as a contagious emotion. So I read an article in the Harvard Business Review not long ago about cynicism in organizations and how pervasive it becomes when you have more than one person start to engage in cynical views of the company or whatever, how that just spreads like, the common cold, the flu through the entire, or it can through the entire company. And so, yeah, you can certainly get it intergenerationally, as we both did, I think. I mean, my dad was a crushed optimist, I think, in a lot of ways.
Same.
And so he had a cynical view to some things in the world, and other times he had a very open view to them. So I wouldn't say he was a cynic all the time, but he definitely would lean toward that. He had enough rough upbringing and enough of a hard childhood and enough of a, scratch and claw his way to where he was type of thing, where, yeah, he had gotten stepped on enough times to where he sort of adopted that view. And I think, once you're in it, unless you actively seek a way out of it, then that's just going to become your default mode. Right.
Yeah. And I think as we get older and as our brains get more rigid and we don't have as many neural pathways unless we're actively trying to change it,
right,
it really does wire us in the longer term for more depressive states. And that's what I'm trying to avoid, especially in this world, because, it can be overwhelming in this current version of the world and technology and having all the information fed to us. And it feels like a very, like, technology can be extremely manipulative, and it can manipulate us into cynicism,
certainly,
and also nihilism.
Yeah.
And those two things, I have a greater awareness about it, and so I know I have to create better boundaries. I can appreciate where a cynic is coming from, or actually, let me say, I can understand where cynics are coming from, because again, like, I call myself a recovering cynic. I get it.
Yeah.
But it is a choice, right? It's a choice to say, you know what, I'm going to hope for the best. And it's not even about the outcome for me as much as it is about the decision and the boundary to say that, no, I'm not going to give into cynicism because it's going to affect my day to day. It's going to affect how I engage in my life. It's why if you haven't seen, loved everything everywhere all at once. I think they did a fantastic job about kind of addressing all of this.
Yeah, agree. I was going to also add into to that part of the conversation that our minds are also trained to look, biologically trained to look for negativity as a means of self-protection and preservation, right? So not just danger, but also, other situations you want to stay away from, right? So we're programmed to look for that stuff first. And so that can turn into a thought loop that can lead to a cynical viewpoint very easily if that's what unless you have more control over your own mind and are able to direct it and just notice that thoughts are just thoughts and, that whole meditative deal, right? Not attached to those things. You can easily get down the rabbit hole of cynicism and end up at the bottom and not know how you got there. It's partly your brain, it's partly who you hang out with, it's partly your parents, it's partly your society that you're in. Exposure. Yeah, it's partly the media and everything like that. So, yeah, I think this is not about me, but I wanted to tell you a little story about about cynicism, which is I used to work in the library. For the listeners, I've had a lot of jobs, right? I won't even go into the list. Let's just say I've had a lot of jobs. Renaissance man, or I hop around a lot. Either one.
Me too.
Anyway, I worked in a public library for a number of years, and I loved that job because they put me in charge of the computer lab where people could come and use computers for free. And nobody else wanted that job because there were often psychotic episodes and fights and stuff in there. But the bottom line is you're helping people more than anywhere else in the library almost, because these are people, often unhoused people, often low-income people who come in to use the computer because they don't have one and then need to know how to get some very critical things done, like fill out forms for the government or public assistance, whatever that is. And so I always loved that vibe in there and that I could help people like that. I'm also pretty good at diffusing weird situations. So anyway, this lady came in one time and she was about 75 years old, I would think, somewhere in that area. And she didn't have a library card. So I helped her get a library card. And she said she needed to fill out a housing form because she was being evicted and she needed to apply for public housing assistance. And I said, okay, come in and we'll just do it. And she said, well, I've never used, I don't really have a computer and I don't really know how they work. And I said, okay. But the front desk is there. It's just right by everybody. The computer lab's all around you. So I just sat next to her and we just filled out the form and it wasn't a big deal at all. But about halfway through, she started crying next to me. And I said, are you okay, ma'am? And she said, I just don't understand why you're being so nice to me. And it hit me right between the eyes because I just realized that people are told no all day long and I was her first yes. And that little yes right there might have put a crack in that cynical attitude that everybody's out for their own self-interest, Yeah. And I'm sure she had a lot of evidence for that in her life, right? You could tell on her face and her demeanor and the way she stood. She had a lot of evidence for that worldview. But I put a crack of light in that worldview that day, and that felt great. And I was just doing my job. I mean, I did that for everybody. It wasn't just her. I'm like, like everybody who asked me, I sat with them and got them into Google Docs and all that stuff and helped them with their stuff. But that one hit me. That one hit me hard because it made me realize how important what I was doing was at the moment.
So small to you is
so small to me.
So huge to someone going through something so stressful.
So and you can, I think you can backdoor your own cynicism by doing that for other people. If you, it's part of being the change you want to see in the world, I think. And that is that also lifted me that day. It wasn't just her that lifted me up.
When you think of how people, what energy they bring, not their words, but the energy they bring. I'm very sensitive to that. People can walk into a room and I'm very sensitive to where they are in their mood.
Me too.
And their energy. It's a blessing and a curse. Really.
Yeah, both. Yes. Because you can also absorb that, right? And that's not good, right? Observe, don't absorb is what you always say.
Don't absorb. Yeah. It's taken me about 48 years.
I say it all the time now. Nora gave me that phrase, y'all, and it is a handy one. I suggest you adopt it immediately. I say it all the time.
To be fair, I did not make that up. I stole that.
Doesn't matter.
Steal like an artist.
You still gave it to me.
I'm gifting that, and I'm gifting that to anyone who's listening. But the energy that people bring, it shows that if I come to someone with an energy of cynicism, where I think I'm already disappointed, I don't think it's going to work out. People pick that up and then they reflect that back to you.
Absolutely.
So to feel that from someone and still say no, I'm going to still show up with kindness. I'm still going to show up. you might have just shifted something for her so that she goes out into the world with a slightly different perspective, a slightly different mood, knowing that the world is not all hot garbage. And maybe she extends that to someone else. And it's that ripple effect that is extremely powerful. And it only comes from our personal space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you can be that. You can be that, and it will improve you at the same time. I love that idea. Okay. So when we're talking about shedding your cynicism, I mean, there's some steps that I went through to do it, and I know there's some steps that you went through to do it. It's not just to start thinking in a different way. Like all of a sudden, if you're cynical, you're in the shit. Let's just say it. You are wired. In your own shit. It's wired, and it's hard to get out of. So you have to have a strategy about how to get out of it, I think. And that's not to say the same thing works for everybody else too. And believe me, listeners, we're extremely excited to hear ways that you've done it for yourself that are different than the ones that we're about to list. But let's just go tit for tat down this list real quick. I'll do the first one here, Nora. So my first one in there is stop watching the news. Stop watching the news. Stop engaging with the news, because the news is a horror show that is a capitalist, endeavor. Like they get money for putting their program on from their sponsors. And if their sponsors are, whoever, weapons makers or pharmaceuticals, then guess what? Then the news is going to be about that. And also, they have that great tenet that they always use, whatever bleeds leads. So what you're going to see is horror, death, bad economy, poor weather, drive-by shootings, crime out of control, all of those things. It's too much, and it's not an accurate worldview. It's not how
fear sells, man.
Exactly. It's not how the world works. Fear does sell, unfortunately, but the news is not the world. I mean, that's one thing you have to get right off the bat. Rick Rubin, who wrote this great book on creativity that Nora and I both read. I love Rick Rubin too. He had this to say about it. Because there's an endless stream of data available to us. And he doesn't even differentiate between good and bad data here. So this is not just like the news. This is all of what we're bombarded with from our phones, computers, every part, radio, television. Because there's an endless stream of data available to us, and we have a limited bandwidth to conserve, we might consider carefully curating the quality of what we allow in.
Yes.
And that's not something Rick Rubin came up with. That is a Buddhist tenet. There's these things in Buddhism, there are things called sense doors, right? And they are seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and mind is the other one. But their thing is like protect your sense doors. Like be really picky about what you let in your sense doors. Make sure it's the quality of a way that you want to live, right?
Yeah. I also want to be clear too that what we're not saying is, don't pay attention to what's happening in the world.
Of course not. Yeah.
So there's a difference. I don't watch the news. I read the news. And even with that, I read a few sources to find out what's going on in the world. And then I put it away. And I don't let all of the barrage of news consumption. I have a boundary around that because it does impact me. I'm aware of what's going on. I need to be aware. We all need to be aware, but we also have technology has made it so that we have all of the knowledge and very little of the wisdom.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Understatement. I mean, you think about how people used to live. I mean, people never used to go more than 20 miles from their home, if that. Usually not more than 2 miles. So how much information were ancient people getting in, like agrarian societies? How much you were getting, like, who's getting married, who had a baby, who died. Right. Yeah, exactly. That's it. That was your news, everything. Or the kingdom has sent the decree down for more taxes or whatever. That was basically your whole thing. And now it's just, no, it's okay. Now it's just of course, I don't want to sound like the old guy yelling at a cloud, but it's just like this.
But we are.
But I'm yelling at the cloud. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. iCloud. No, I was just going to say I read somewhere, and I don't remember the source, but it was something along the lines that a newspaper already had 100 times more the information than what our brains were basically evolved to handle in information. And that was just a newspaper. We now have a device, most of us at least, in front of us in our pockets that has a constant flow of information and data about what's going on in the world that is just, we cannot process. We are not built to process that. It affects us. So when you know that, I'm addicted like everyone else is to social media to certain degrees, but I have parameters I've set around myself. I have not signed up for TikTok, even though people are like, you got to get on TikTok. No, I don't.
Me neither. No TikTok here.
No, yeah. I'm good. I've designed my my social media. So we're going into like social media, but take social media breaks, or at least make it that your algorithm works for you. My Instagram algorithm consists of this. This is what I like on it.
So this is number 2 on the list of things to do. Okay.
Number 2 is take a social media break.
Yeah.
Or if you're not going to take a break, make it work for you.
Curate it. Yeah.
Curate it. My social media, this is what my social media comes up as. Dogs.
Me too, dogs.
Design.
Check.
Yes. Gardening.
Check.
And landscape photography.
Check. Yep.
Yeah. That's basically, it is like, all right, if I'm going to be on this, I'm going to make it so that I'm only seeing things that are going to maybe produce a little bit of dopamine and make me feel good, or like make me feel creative. You can do that. Going on and on with like all of the crazy stuff that is currently happening in the world. And to be honest, the world has always had crazy stuff going on in it. Just to have that constantly in front of us is not good for us.
And I don't even think that we don't even retain the information, but I think we do retain the feeling though. That's the problem.
100%.
Right? So if you're just scrolling down and it's death, taxes, death, taxes, then you're going to come away thinking about, just obsessing about death all day long, or taxes, or whatever that thing is, or the problems in, wherever the current war is happening, or whatever. But you retain none of the information, but you come away with that heavy feeling no matter what. Yep. And this attitude about the world that this is hopeless. Look at all the death and taxes happening.
100%. And also real quick, social media in particular, so much of our economy is the attention economy. And like where your awareness, where your energy goes, screwing up.
Where your awareness goes, energy flows, I think.
Yes,
is what we're,
exactly.
Yeah,
so if your energy is like looking at all of the terrible things, that's where your brain is wiring that way. So
exactly.
Hack it.
Yeah, hack it. What are you paying attention to? Exactly. I mean, my social media feed is about the same as yours, but you could add in like weird restorations of old metal stuff that guys do on there, where they re-engineer parts for old coffee makers and stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just love watching that stuff. I love watching people be creative, and I love watching people do process type things. That's one of my things, whether they're building a car or a refrigerator or what. It's just endlessly fascinating to me. So I populate my feed with all those kind of creative people doing that, or painters, all these creatives that do the little reels and things like that, and also dogs, of course, and design and gardening and landscape photos.
I try my best too, to not even just from the consumption side of it, of like curating that, but also being mindful about what I'm sharing. And
for sure, and
I think a lot of people don't really go in with that intention as well. So because it's like anything. When you walk out the door, you're affecting people immediately. When you get on social media and you post something, you're affecting people immediately, whatever that is. I mean, they have the choice to skip over it, but maybe they don't. Maybe it makes them feel worse. So you got to think about that stuff. I think about that too before I post. All right. I'm going to move on to
number 3.
This is something I do, a practice that me and my husband try to do every night when we remember.
So now we're talking about gratitude practice. This is number 3.
This
gratitude
is part of my
practice.
gratitude
Okay,
practice.
please.
Yes.
So tell us again.
Sorry.
So what is that like? Yeah.
So part of my gratitude practice is every day, whenever we at least remember and not fall asleep beforehand, I ask my husband to name 3 things, specific things about that day that he was most grateful for.
And you call that the big 3, right?
The big 3.
I love that. I love that name for it. It adds another dimension to it. I just want to make sure you mention that. I like, what's the big 3? That sounds like a good
thing. The
thing.
Big 3. Yeah. Right. The big 3. So, like, it's like, it'll be like, this morning when we took our dog for a walk and we saw like the birds in the trees and they sounded amazing. Or, I loved the snowfall that was coming down. It made everything blanket. Or, it's just, they're simple things, but the simple things are what make the day-to-day great. And it's wiring us to keep looking for the good.
Right. So yes, exactly. Which is the opposite of what your brain wants to do, which is look for the danger, right? Look for the negative, look for the danger. So you have to retrain it then. And the good way to retrain it is through gratitude. Now, I know that there's about 1 billion podcast shows, videos, everything else. They're like, gratitude practice, gratitude practice, gratitude practice. And it always sounds like,
it sounds like a chore.
It sounds like a chore.
It sounds like another thing to write down at your, it doesn't have to be that way.
You don't have to write it down. Hey, don't write it down.
Exactly.
I don't care if people tell you to write it down. You don't have to write it down. You just have to go out and engage in it. That's all you have to do.
Thank you.
You just have to engage it. Look at something and go, I'm so glad that I'm experiencing that right now. I mean, it can be as simple as your house. Like every night I do it too, and every morning I do it as well. I have a list of about 15 things usually I go through or something like that. And one of those things is I always think of, I'm so glad to be warm and fed. I'm so glad to be warm and fed
all the time.
I mean, and I can feel how grateful I am for that, because I've been hungry. I haven't been unhoused before, but I've been pretty hungry and pretty broke. And that's a terrible place to be. Like when food scarcity is a thing, you can't do anything else. So that's one of my big gratitude things. It's like, I'm so happy that my stomach is full. I'm in a warm place. There's a roof over my head. I have my dog. You know, there's so many good things. So many good things.
How many people in this world don't have that, right?
Yeah, man, so many. Not only that, but are living in horrible conditions. I mean, you know how the world works.
Yes.
I'm not going to tell you because I don't want to make you a cynic.
Right. Also, I have to just share that quite often on my gratitude, my big three.
Yeah.
Quite often, depending on the day, is my gratitude for chilaquiles. I freaking love them. That might be like, if I were on death row, that might be my final meal.
I'm really grateful for you, honey. You are the best husband I could possibly do. I'm so grateful for that walk we took earlier in the snow. God, my God, the birds. And chilaquiles.
Chilaquiles, salsa verde. I love them.
Hey, I'm with you. I can get behind it. That's why I'm laughing. I can get behind that 100%.
Yes.
All right.
All right, you take the next one.
All right, let's move on to the next one here, which is selfless giving. We're halfway through the list here. All right, selfless giving. So this is something I talked about before, which is being the evidence that you need to see in the world to become less cynical, right? So it's non-transactional care in there. There's nothing behind it to, you're not going to film this. You're not going to post about it on social media. You're not even going to write it in your journal. Maybe write it in your journal, but you're not going to let anybody read it, right? This is between you and the universe and whoever else that you think you're helping that day. So it could be little. It could be like the library story. I didn't even think I was until she told me I was, till I realized how much I was helping her. So it doesn't even have to be reciprocated with thank you or anything like that. It could be as easy as handing somebody some money or, or helping somebody get something off a shelf or whatever it is. Just
or
go out.
Smile.
Or smile. I mean, you can tell what people need if you get out of yourself. That's the thing.
Take your ego out.
Take your ego out. This is another way to become a lot less cynical, is just start focusing on other people instead of yourself. Instead of how you feel about the world. Look where you can be, like Mr. Rogers said, right? It's like, look for the helpers, right? Be one of those helpers. That's what his mother told him. Look for the helpers. Because in all the horrible situations, there's always people that are helping. And they're always doing it silently, and that's why they don't get on the news, right? Because they don't tell anybody about it. And they just do it silent. They just work silently. And there's billions of people who are like that in the world. You just don't hear about it because they do it in an anonymous fashion, right? And
for some people, that's just their job too. And it's not, quote unquote, just like, I think of like, you work in a fire department and you show up and you are taking, you're risking your life to help other people quite often. And those, and the world is filled with them. And when you start looking for them, you start seeing them more and more. And it really does change your experience with other people in your own life.
Yeah,
it really does.
I mean, when I spent a good deal of time in Mexico, and I was in Mexico one time, and I was on the beach, and it was after a particularly difficult job that I had, and I was going down to sort of figure out what I was going to do next, And there's all these abuelitas, all these grandmas who sell jewelry and stuff on the beach, right? And
they have chilaquiles.
They didn't have chilaquiles, Nora. Calm down. This is not a chilaquile story.
I got very excited there.
No. But usually their job is to sell jewelry and things like that on the beach. And so they're usually fairly aggressive with like trying to sell you stuff. But this lady, I guess she saw what my vibe was immediately, and she just asked me if I was okay in Spanish instead. And then she just went on her way afterwards, and that felt so good. It was like she didn't want anything for it. She knew she wasn't going to sell me anything. She could tell by the way I was sitting there and how I looked, and she just kind of knew that I needed, to somebody to check in on me real quick.
You need some love.
Yeah. And that's what she was about in that moment. And that, it just busted any cynicism I was feeling in the moment, because I didn't know that lady. She's in a whole nother country, doesn't even speak my native language. And yet somehow she cared about me enough to ask, which is beautiful. A big deal. So when you think this just goes to show though, you don't have to do any grand gestures. You don't even have to give away any money. You can just simply go, You know, how are you doing? How are you doing?
Yeah.
I did it this morning when I walked by a bunch of construction workers over there. You know, hey guys, how are you doing? They were happy to talk about it. It changed their idea. You know, it's good. Great thing to do.
Paul, I'm proud
Great thing to
know you.
do. So that's selfless giving. That's a good way to get out of it. You know. All right. So next one, you take it.
Reevaluate your inner circle.
Oh, this is a
Think of
good
the-
one, isn't it?
Yeah,
This is a
think of
good
like
one.
the top 5 people that you surround, that you're surrounded by the most, and who influence you the most. There's those people ought to be really good people. Sometimes they're not, and you have to create some hardcore boundaries. But
That's all we have to say about that. Make sure they're good people. Yeah.
Yeah,
I liked it.
And if they're not living life with dignity and integrity and respect, maybe start creating some boundaries and becoming that person so that you attract more of people with dignity and respect and integrity to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, the people that you surround yourself with massively influence you.
Massively. In fact, I think a lot of the times they become the voice in your head, the negative voice in your head. If it's or the positive voice in your head, depending on who it is, right? But if you think about the voice in your head when it gets really negative in that tape loop, how often, and then you think about that one friend who was always like, "This'll never work," you know, or whatever. Yeah. You're like, "Yeah, the world is terrible," you know.
Debbie
like
Downer.
Debbie Downer. That's that Smurf who was always like, "It's over,"
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Or Bill Paxton in Alien, you know, something like that. Oh man,
That's Smurf, right?
Anyway, all those things, you know, that can become your tape loop, right? And that's super dangerous for your own mental health. That's really dangerous to be hanging out with that energy all the time. Like, you've got to cut bait with it, or like you said, set boundaries, because sometimes you can't cut bait. Sometimes it's your family. Sometimes you live with that family. Sometimes it's your spouse. You have to like set a boundary where it doesn't get into your mental space.
Yeah.
You know, observe, don't absorb. You can't absorb it. You can't. So you got to set some kind of boundary where that doesn't happen. So what kind of boundary is that, and where?
An energetic boundary.
Okay. So
I would think.
So this is not this is not a boundary that you declare to the person. You are setting an energetic boundary within yourself. Well, that's an important distinction to make, right? Because some boundaries you need to set with people. Like, listen, if you talk to me that way again, we're going to have a discussion about it or something like that.
But I think even that communication starts with an energetic boundary.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
For sure.
It always starts with an energetic boundary of like, oh, I don't want that in my energetic space. I don't want to put that energy out in the world. And it's really paying attention to that.
Yeah, I think sometimes.
I mean, think of how many people ask this question when it comes to Thanksgiving time. That's why Thanksgiving's so difficult for so many people, because they're like, oh, I don't know how to set an energetic boundary.
Right.
Yeah. When you're sitting at the table with people who don't maybe have the same outlook as you, but you don't have to engage with that, really.
No, you don't have to engage it. But the important part in there, what I was trying to get to, what you said, I think is really crucial, is that you don't need to do this out loud with them, because sometimes you can't. Sometimes that's a dangerous position for you to be in if you're an abusive or some kind of family dynamic that's not safe for you. You can set an energetic boundary within yourself and just observe, don't absorb, right? So if all this madness is happening around you, you can set that boundary where you just don't absorb it. You need to have a little bit of Teflon on you, where it's just like, yep, that's them. You know, whoop, he said that. Yep, whoop, that's a thing.
You don't have to show up for every argument.
You don't, or any of them, really. You don't have to show up for any of them if you don't.
Exactly.
And I recommend that you don't. Yeah. All right. So reevaluate your inner circle. That's good. We got 3 left to go. Get playful is the next one, which I really like. So I did a lot of improv at one time, and it really taught me a lot about playing with life. How life is is a fun game can be a really fun game to play if you engage it in the proper way, right? So if your whole life is drudge or whatever, you know, what I did is I changed. I used to feel like that, there was a lot of drudgery going on. It had sort of to do with my choices and my job and just the time in my life. And what got me out of that was the improv sense of play. I think that you can engage almost anything as a playful activity or gamify something for yourself. But it's not so much gamifying, because that's more like hacking your workday. It's a sense of play. It's a feeling that you have that you're playing with life as you go through it, that it's not just a serious, you know, seminar, college class or something that you're going through and have to get through and take notes on. And it's not that.
Yeah. I like that. It's like it's the building excitement.
Yeah.
over, you know?
It
Like
can
getting
be
excited about
very
stuff.
exciting. It's always very exciting because you never know what's going to happen next, right?
Well, I think that's like tying it back to the cynical stuff. Like I know a lot of cynics, and I have been that cynic that's like, but like I'm not going to get excited about it because maybe it's not going to be exciting. Like it's
Yeah.
not cool or like that sort of stuff.
Well,
where-
again, it's pre-masking disappointment, right?
Yes.
That's what it is.
It's
Before it even ever happens, the thing is I'm going to protect myself from it being
Yep.
shitty by taking this attitude of maybe it won't be great all the time.
I'm going to protect this attitude of maybe it's going to be shitty by being shitty.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what it
My
becomes,
shit
right?
mindset.
And then guess what? You manifest a bunch of shittiness around
Yeah,
you, and
exactly.
everybody around you, all the things around you are shitty, and that's the downfall of cynicism, right? So get playful is what I say. So next one, rediscover wonder and awe.
Yeah, I love this. I feel like as we age, a lot of us lose our sense of wonder and awe. And for me, the way that I often experience that on like a DNA level, I absolutely love being in incredible, majestic natural landscapes, provided that I'm safe, of course. But I seek out, it's almost like not an addiction, but it's like I always seek out like going out into the woods or taking trips to incredible places. Like last year, Kevin and I did a camper van trip through Utah and did all 5 national parks there. And it's just being in wide open spaces with just incredible landscapes. It really just, it juices me up, man. It fills me with wonder. It fills me with awe, stargazing, all that stuff. It's like primal to me. And I feel like the more I engage with that, the more I want it and the more I look for the wonder and awe in nature. And that's honestly like, for a lot of people, their wonder and awe can come in the form of going to a church. My version of church is getting out into the woods or getting out into nature. That is like the sacred place for me because that I can just ponder an oak tree and how long it's been around and how that's come out. And I just am flabbergasted. It puts my life into perspective in a way that is like, I know for some people, it's like, oh, we're just here for a blip in the radar. And to me, that's empowering because it's like, we're only here for a little while. Like, let's get going.
Get
Let's
busy.
go do the things.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you?
I think that's, same for me. I mean, I grew up half the time in the city and half the time on the coast. And so I had very meditative weekends when I was a kid because I was an only child and for a long time, the only kid in my family. Like my next cousin came when I was already 10 years old. So I had the first 10 years of my life basically being the only kid in the whole family. And I had aunts and uncles and all that. And I would often spend time just, it was the 70s. So, I'm Gen X and so are you. My parents were just like, here's your bicycle, see you at dark.
Hey,
that kind of
bye.
thing.
Come home when
come home
someday.
whenever.
It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? Oh,
Yeah.
wait, we have kids.
Yeah, right. That kind of attitude. But I would often spend just hours with myself and nature, like watching birds or collecting sand dollar fossils, which are plentiful on the beach that I grew up near. I was just a kid. I was just doing what I was doing, but I get the same thing out of the city somehow. The way I do it in the city is I just go for like macro, right? I just zoom in to nature. Like I stop and I look at tree leaves. I don't just like view it as scenery. Like I have an ant's eye view sometimes. I take pictures like that. And it's just it's always incredible, the patterns and I get that same religious feeling from that as I do looking at El Capitan or something like that. It's the same.
I can see a mushroom sprouting and I'm like, whoa, look at that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible.
Or like
it's incredible.
little budding flowers, like the crocus in the beginning. Yeah, it's amazing. I love it.
But wonder and awe I don't think wonder and awe have to come from nature either. I think they can also come from just starting to fill your life with more wholesome people, things. It can be books can give you wonder, certainly. People can be wondrous. I told you art can be wondrous. I told you this morning I spent about 2 hours just watching Mr. Rogers videos, such speeches and things like that, just because I love that guy and I just needed to get my tank filled up. I just needed to get my tank filled up so I can go out and try to be better today than I was this morning.
I like to look at it in the terms of like everything that is it expanding me or is it shrinking me? If it's shrinking me, turn away from that and go toward what's expanding. Yeah. It's filling me up.
Definitely. Yeah. So let's go to I there, which is shift your mindset from but to what if.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
So I think that for a lot of cynics, if you offer something, they'll look for the kind of like the flaws, the loopholes, but what if, but this might happen. And I think I don't think that the antidote to that is necessarily this could happen as much as like, what if it were possible? Like, I think for someone who is trying to, I think if someone is trying to get their neural pathways in a way that's going to help them, I don't think the antidote of saying like, if they think that they're garbage or the world is garbage, is to say the world is not garbage, like the flip side of the coin of that. I think because it feels like you don't believe it yet, right? But I think you can plant the seed with the question, what if it were possible that the world wasn't garbage? Or what if it was possible that I was a good person? Or what if it were possible that there is beauty in the world? Rather than just claiming to someone. I feel like there have been cynics that I have like tried to say, like, try to shift their mindset and just shifting it with the opposite of what they're saying. They don't believe it. But when you plant the seed of, but is it possible that maybe, then they have to contemplate that.
Right. I like that.
I think that
I like
contemplation,
that maybe.
right?
Yeah.
So it turns but this is going to be hot garbage. And then you can turn that to, well, what if it were possible?
Yeah.
What would that look like if it weren't hot garbage?
And I think it can also be incremental is another thing, right? It doesn't have to be, they don't have to buy wholesale that the world isn't hot garbage. They could buy that maybe there's a possibility that part of it isn't hot garbage. Because there's definitely a lot of hot garbage in the world. Let's not lie to ourselves. There's a lot of hot garbage out there.
There's a lot of beauty too. That's the thing. It really is. It depends on the lenses that you put on.
Well, you don't have to look for the hot garbage, but sometimes you have to look for the beauty in there.
Yeah.
And I think if you, if you can consider the possibility that not all of it, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Not all of it's bathwater, So
yeah. And that poor baby.
That poor baby. So I like that. So shifting your mindset from but to what if. I like that's a good
what if it were possible?
What if it were possible? What if it's not all hot garbage? So next one, consume wholesome educational media. We kind of talked about that. Feed your brain healthy things as you would your body. So like I personally, I watch a lot of like British competition shows like Bake Off or The Great Pottery Throwdown or Britain's Best Woodworker, because these are low stakes shows where people support each other, and they are competition shows, but they're not at all like what we, like Project Runway or something like that, where there's always a lot of infighting and a lot of very little support between the designers and things. These are all very wholesome, like, oh man, I was just so glad to be here type of thing. I got so much out of this experience. I didn't win, but man, was it great. I can't believe how much I learned. That's the kind of thing that comes out. Right. You and I both watched The Doghouse, which is a show where people adopt dogs,
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah. And families come in and they all have stories about why they want a dog, and it's really touching. And then they get matched up with the perfect dog and they go home with it at the end, and then they check up with them 6 months later. Stuff like that is great. And
it's like the Ted Lassos of the world.
Exactly.
Loot is another one. I love Maya Rudolph, and I find that one awesome. And I will confess that I still watch Jersey Shore.
Oh dear, is that wholesome? I'm not sure if that's
not
wholesome.
at all.
Not at all.
But I do have an energetic boundary around it.
There you
it
go.
can be more entertaining than it is impacting me.
Good, very good. I like that.
Just saying, I'm not all like I'm not a Buddha sitting over here.
Oh, that's really funny. I didn't know you watched Jersey Shore.
Oh, I would say it's a guilty pleasure, but I don't believe in guilty pleasures.
Gotcha.
It's just pleasure.
So the last thing I'll say about the wholesome educational media thing is replacing your phone in the morning and at night with some non-digital material like a book or a puzzle or a board game or something like that. Very strong difference in my life once I started doing that, because I would read at night, but I'd read on my Kindle or I'd read on my phone. I went back to books and
pages before swipes, man.
Yeah, pages before swipes.
That's my rule. Pages before swipes.
Is that
in the morning and the evening.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. And so, since I made that decision, I finished dozens of books, and I just feel a lot better. I think my sleep rhythm, my circadian rhythms are better. I think turning off the screen certainly before I go to bed. And
also
reading
watch
for
what you
90
consume
minutes.
before you go to bed.
Well, that's the other thing.
The Exorcist.
No, don't just read murder mysteries or whatever before bed, which is what I used to do that too. But no, I have a stack of books there that I read over and over again. The Tao Te Ching is one of them, and there's some Buddhist texts, and there's some just inspirational books that I read. There's some the other theology stuff. And it's all like all the ancient wisdom I can kind of get together. That's all written in plain English and easily understandable. These are not like very dense texts at all, but they are very, very deep, and they deserve to be read over and over and over again. So I spend my morning and my evening, usually, at least certainly my evening, reading that stack of books almost exclusively, because I get something new out of it every time. Yeah. Because as you evolve, you start to understand these concepts more and more, but it takes time to do that. So anyway, that's the last thing I'll say about the educational media thing.
All right. What's next on the list?
So we're working on now, work on revealing your true self to the world. What do you think about that?
I think that's something that I'm trying to explore more through self-expression. And I'll say I'm like not the most confident with it, but it's something that, because it feels risky sometimes, like, ooh, I'm vulnerable if I'm trying to express myself in a certain way, or in any way, really. But I think it's a great, what's the word I'm looking for? I think it's a great goal, or not even goal, compass. It's the true north, right? That's what we're really here to do, is like express ourselves in a myriad of ways. I think I really love the great artists, and then I hold them as the standard, which is, it's like, well, I can't pick up the guitar because I can't play like Prince. And that is like, well, you don't have to play like Prince. Like
nobody could. Yeah.
Exactly. Only Prince can play like Prince. But it's just like trying to not hold myself to a standard that would be impossible to meet in how I express myself. But I should still express myself.
Mr. Rogers said an interesting thing about working with Yo-Yo Ma in a graduation ceremony speech that he gave that I watched this morning, which is that watching Yo-Yo Ma work with students was one of the most inspiring things he ever saw, because there was one kid in his cello class that was playing this difficult passage, and he just at all wasn't happy with the tone that he was getting out of this passage, and he played it 4 or 5 times for him, and he listened to it every time, and the kid said, "What do I do?" And Yo-Yo Ma said, "Nothing. There is no one that sounds like you." And that was like the key. He was just like, it wasn't the tone that he heard in his head. And that can be like a craftsmanship issue, right? Okay, so you work on your craft in order to get out what you hear in your head. And Rick Rubin talks about that too. But what he needed was like, nobody's like you. Start to reveal yourself through your music like that. And I think a lot of people reveal themselves much more through their art, their comedy, their whatever that they do. Artists certainly do it like that.
I will also say that, you and I have a common interest in dance and Lindy Hop.
Yeah.
I think that both of us were in positions where we taught Lindy Hop as well. And I know, and I'm not going to speak for you, but I know quite often I would see people with the best intentions of expressing themselves that would be like, I love this particular big shot, quote unquote, dancer. I want to look like them, and mimicking them, but not expressing who they were through the dance.
Yeah.
And it became like quite often like you could see the copying. It wasn't even like like I was influenced by, but it was actual copying.
Sure, I was like one of them too. I did that.
You think so?
Yeah, totally. For not late in my career, but no. But it took me I think it probably took me at least 5 years to find my voice. In that.
Yeah,
so.
and I mean it's always evolving, right?
Yeah.
So that's the other thing, is like it's ever evolving, but like getting more confident in your craft, or a craft to express yourself, is a really wonderful thing.
Yeah, I would want to read this John Green quote that talks about sort of the riskiness of being cynical, in a way, but also the riskiness of being yourself at the same time, right? So he says, it can sometimes feel like loving the beauty that surrounds us is somehow disrespectful to the many horrors that also surround us. And I think that speaks to everything we just talked about, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that is a reason that people, I think, fall into cynicism. It almost feels like with all this shit happening in the world, why do I get to be happy, or why should I see beauty in the world, right?
Like a guilt about joy.
Yeah. So he goes on, but mostly I think I'm just scared that if I show the world my belly, it will devour me. And that speaks to being scared of just showing who you are in the world. And so I wear the armor of cynicism and hide behind the great walls of irony and only glimpse beauty with my back turned to it. And I thought that just hit me in the face yesterday when I read that. I thought, oh, that's so accurate to what it is. Like,
I feel like if you look at any internet comment too, it really, like, which you shouldn't, by the way,
no,
for the most part, that's where people are coming from. Like, how dare you feel any sense of joy when there's so many terrible things going on in the world. And really that gets us both individually and collectively nowhere.
It gets us nothing. It doesn't fix what's out there, and it doesn't fix us. And so what I've come to, and I don't know if you speak to this as well, is that there's no fixing the world.
There's fixing ourselves.
Well, yeah. So the reach for external fixes for what's happening in here, and none of them work. None of them have ever worked. It's the internal dialogue. The people who change the world are the people who have worked on themselves, right? Who have like gotten to a place where they've gotten to a more primal state. They've gotten back to what they were put here to do, and then they go out and do it, and they do change the world. But that's not because of their actions they take in the external world. That's because of their internals that they've worked on and prayed about, or whatever, meditated to, whatever you want to say.
That's really what I'm learning a lot about as I like kind of explore all these inner versions of myself. But pretty much piggybacking off of what you just said is like I'm coming to the understanding that if my happiness is contingent upon the world being a specific way, I will never be happy.
You can't,
right?
It's
so
impossible.
You can't, right? Yeah. And so whether there will always be shit going down in the world because humans are messy, and if my happiness and my joy is contingent upon everyone getting in their shit together and getting happy, then none of us are ever going to be happy.
Yeah,
I find joy as resistance. Like that's become kind of like a new mantra for myself of like coming from finding joy in the world, finding joy in myself and sharing that with people. And that's the way to change your world and other people's worlds.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I absolutely agree. Let's end with the last one here, which is not turning your ideals into expectations. Cause I think this is at the center of everything. Banking off what you just said. So, Peter Senge, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, a quote from somebody I didn't know, but I found yesterday, was scratch the surface of most cynics and you find a frustrated idealist, which is what we were talking about before, someone who made the mistake of converting his ideals into expectations. So that is the whole thing about wanting the world to conform to what your view of it, what you think it should look like, which is a fool's errand and it will never, ever happen. So changing your internal state and doing these things to do it. We gave you, 6, 7, 8 steps here to work on those things. And it's what we've been through and it's what got us to where we are now, which is a much less, make no mistake, we are a work in progress. Are we not, Nora?
100%.
Yeah.
I'm no guru by any means.
Nobody's claiming,
sharing what I'm learning.
Nobody's claiming to be a guru here. We are just sharing what we're learning because I think, people need it. We need it. In order to keep evolving, we need to keep talking about it as well. So that's our impetus for being here in the first place. It's not to be prescriptive and say you need to do these things.
No.
We're just sharing what we've done and what has helped us. And like I said before, we're very excited to hear what helped you start to break down your cynicism and have those walls fall down.
Share away.
Please share away.
I could use all the tools.
We all could.
Yes.
I'm all about more tools at my disposal always.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
Well, I think we brought that in for a landing pretty well, don't you? I like to end right on that point right there. But I will say it's really important, I think, if you want to be happy to work on this stuff. That'll be my, people talk about the keys to happiness all the time, but I think the lack of cynicism is a major one.
That's a massive one.
It's a massive one. Yes.
Yeah. You gotta feed that hope.
Yeah.
You gotta start throwing some kindling on that.
Exactly.
That spark of hope.
Find that crack. Sure. Find that crack where the light comes in, right?
Yeah.
And there's a crack in everything, like Leonard Cohen said, right?
That's including your butt.
Perfect way to end it. Thank you, Nora.
You're welcome.
See you next week. I love you.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah.
Hey, Paul. I love you.
I love you too. See you next time.
Later, dude.
Later. If you'd like to get in touch with us about anything you've heard on the show, please feel free to drop us an email at ifweonlyknewthenpod@gmail.com.
Freedom over cycle stays the same.